My name is Travis Weiner. That's Travisweiner. Sure.
And can you tell us a little bit about your background and what prompted you to ultimately enlist in the Army?
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, I don't remember how I first became interested in it, but I became pretty obsessed with just the military history. Didn't have much of a family history, and I had an uncle that was in the Marines, but didn't have much of a family history. So, I just became really interested and read all these books on it, and you always wanted to talk to vets. And I think that for me, the big thing that drove me enlisting was just a few things in terms of I knew that obviously 9/11 happened when I was I think I was just turned 16. And then of course Iraq was building up, and so I knew that we were countries at war. I felt that it was my responsibility. So many generations before had done to be a part of that and help. And I also wanted to do it for more selfish reasons that most people do. I mean, not only the benefits but the training. To test myself and win badges and medals and whatnot. And that kind of captures kind of why I joined up.
And so you joined up at what point in your life?
So I was 17, but there's delayed entry program. So basically, like I think I signed my papers at 17, maybe 18, but I was 18 when I went into basic training. Yeah.
And where did you do your basic training?
I did at Fort Benning, Georgia. Yeah.
What was that like?
It was definitely a shock. I came from upper middle class background, and relatively sheltered, at least compared to a lot of people that join the military. And so, kind of being thrust into an environment with a lot of people from areas of the country and backgrounds that I never met before, was a tough adjustment, as it is for everybody. But it's also like a fused melting pot. So, the one of the things that's tough about it is it's tough for everybody in terms of adjusting to it. I do remember when I got to basic training, there's a period of a week or two where you go to this unit called 30th AG, 30th Adjutant General. It's basically just before you can start real basic training, you have to get your paperwork and your shots and all that crap taken care of. And so everybody goes there for a couple weeks. It's like the pre checkup. And it was right when the election was happening. And I think I'd been there a day or two when the election happened. And then I remember that there was this 24, 48-hour period where John Kerry hadn't conceded because there was irregularities in the Ohio vote count. And I remember the drill sergeants brought us into this huge auditorium and basically said, you guys better pray that he concedes. They basically just led us to believe that they were going to take it out on us if he, somehow won. And at that point, in addition to wanting to join the military, which I always wanted to, I was very politically involved. I worked on campaigns and stuff going in. So I was pretty tied into that. And I just remember thinking that was a little weird and concerning. I just remember kind of like a little red flag went off for me at that point. But beyond that, I mean, we weren't thinking too much about it once we actually got to basic. So the other thing I'll say about it is that it was during a time when the military, Defense Department, Pentagon were realizing that they were going to need way more bodies in Iraq than they thought they did. And so what they did during that time was, and you can look this up, but they basically, the waivers that the Pentagon grants every year, a certain number for felons or for, you're not physically fit enough or whatever, it went up during that time. And so I went through basic with some guys that had no business being in basic, but that actually got pushed through and graduated because, and our drill sergeants told us kind of privately afterwards, we tried to prevent this person from graduating, but our chain of command said you will graduate this number of people because, big army wants these bodies. And so I remember that was a little concerning too. But all in all, a tough experience for a kid from my background, but not, nothing that I couldn't handle, I guess, in the end. So, yeah.
How long was your basic training?
So when I went into basic, assume they still do it, they call it OSIT, which is one station unit training. So if you join up as infantry, they combine your basic infantry training so that, as opposed to like a medic or a cook or somebody else that goes to basic and then they go to their specialty training. For the infantry, for us, they just mash it all together. So I think it was 4 months around there, between 3 and 4 months. Yeah.
Okay. And then what happens after basic?
So after basic, you get assigned to your unit. Different guys, are going to like airborne school or they're going to this unit. So I got assigned to the 101st Airborne. So I was basically told to report there in like a couple weeks. I got to go back actually. I can't remember if I opted into this program, if they just assigned to me, but I got to go back to my hometown for a couple weeks to work for my recruiter for a couple weeks prior to going to my unit. And my recruiter, I guess I'm backing up in chronology a little bit, was a cook by training and basically just lied his ass off to me about all my questions about, I wanted this school or that, and his answers to me were just bold-faced lies. And I kind of realized that by the time I got back, and just like wanted nothing to do with him. So that was an interesting experience. Yeah.
So then what else did you do during that time period?
So I was able to go home for a couple weeks, and I think I had to meet with him a couple times, and just spent some time with the family. Slid my car on some snow on the road and totaled it, and miraculously was totally unharmed. One of my 9 lives, and just tried to spend time with family before I had to go to Fort Campbell in Kentucky.
Okay. Yeah. And so you met up with your unit in Kentucky?
I did.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that's it's kind of like the same old story, especially for combat arms units. So the new guys that get there, they're just mercilessly hazed, and it's just the tradition. So it was another tough transition, just wanting to prove yourself and not knowing a thing. I remember I got there, and then a week later, we went. The unit was scheduled to go to JRTC, which is a Joint Readiness Training Center in Louisiana, along with the National Training Center in California. It's the 2 huge training centers that units, particularly combat arms units, will go once or twice a year to get ready for their deployment. Huge villages, play, Iraqis, and so we went there after I was there for a couple weeks, and I just tried to get up to speed on everything that was going on. So.
And were you aware of what was going on, in Iraq?
Yeah. So we pay attention to the news, and that leading up to that first deployment, our commander. In fact, I'll always remember this at JRTC. We had, this is how the Army does it, I don't know why, but they rotate in lieutenants, they rotate in captains, and so the captain that was a captain when I got there, the head of the company commander, he was with us, and then he was with us for JRTC, but we deployed with a different captain. So this captain was just with the unit. He had been with them for the initial deployment, 2003. And we were down there with him for JRTC, and then we got a new one going in, and he was the best one we had. But this first one, we were at JRTC, we went to this cookout. At the end of JRTC, they brought us down to this cookout in Louisiana, in this park, and we had this huge crawfish boil, and there was this lake and everything, and it was a lot of fun to play basketball. But then he was talking to us at the end, and he had been updating the lieutenants and updating us on just the area, because we knew what area we were going to and what was going on. And he literally told us at the end, he said, guys, we're going on this deployment, and some people are going to get badly hurt, and some people are going to get killed. That's just it. That's where we're going. And you guys have to accept that and not pretend like it doesn't exist, and just, I don't know, deal with it how you will, but just don't pretend. And I just remember when he said that, I was just like, I mean, but the way that he said it, and this is a guy that been over there the first time, I was just like, holy shit, okay, this is no joke. I mean, it never was, but that kind of thing. And so that was in April or May or something, and then we had a few more months. We deployed ultimately in October of that year. Yeah.
What year?
2005.
Okay. And so how long between when you enlisted to when you were getting your orders to deploy, how long was that period?
Sure. To when I actually ended up deploying, that would be, let me just think now, maybe about a year and a half. maybe a year and 3/4, something like that. Yeah.
Did you feel ready?
No, not at all. I mean, they say you never do, you know, and you could always use more, you know, training and everything. I felt like I was with people that knew what they were doing, people that had been over there before, you know, but, you know, just in terms of how they described the area and everything, and, you know, they send us to a week of, you know, cursory cultural language training, and, you know, we get some range time, but not enough, and just, what would be the most accurate answer? I think I was, you know, I was so young and immature at that time. I wasn't ready, but I didn't even know I wasn't ready. You know, I wasn't thinking, you know, like some guys, you know, like I'm, you know, G.I. Joe and gung ho, I'm gonna, you know, win the war by myself. I wasn't thinking that at all. I wasn't, but I think I was just so ignorant, or just kind of out of it without that perspective, that I didn't have the mindset of like, I'm not trained enough, you know. But I certainly was. I mean, none of us were. There's no question.
So once you get the information that you will be deploying,
Yeah.
how long until you actually deploy?
Sure. So at that time too, you know, it was around that time period where, like, if you were in, you know, if you were in a combat arms unit within one of the, you know, main divisions in the Army, 10th Mountain, 82nd, 101st, 4th ID, 3rd ID, whatever. If you were in that division, everybody pretty much knew that you were basically on a year-on, year-off schedule. And so it wasn't a shocker when you got orders to deploy. The only question was, like, when and where exactly, what month, where. And so when I first got to the unit, you know, I didn't know exactly when they'd be deploying again. But then, you know, because rumors are always flying. But then it, you know, became clear that they were on the year-on, year-off schedule, which meant that they would be going again in like September, October. And so when I found out, I think we officially get told, because they're, you know, in the Army, it's like, you know, the rumor mill is crazy, and sometimes you know before it's official, and sometimes the rumor mill's wrong. In this particular case, you knew pretty quick. So I think we knew like maybe 4 or 5 months leading up for good, that we were deploying it, you know, in October, November time frame, and where we were going to. So even though that can change a lot, so it didn't change for us. In fact, that first time, I think Hurricane Katrina was 2005. Yeah. So what happened that first time is we were actually on standby. It was either going to be our unit and 101st, or this 82nd unit that actually went going down to New Orleans. We each didn't know which one would go down. And then we were also, it was up in the air whether we were going to Afghanistan or not, because there was always one brigade from 101st going to Afghanistan. And then it became finalized like 4 months out. So, yeah.
What are those 3-4 months like? What are the feelings? What are the training? Does training change?
Yeah. So it ramps up a little bit at the beginning, but then I think at the end, you know, they don't want to be making you go to the range like the last week. And so, you know, what the unit is doing is just scrambling to get ready, not only to get guys trained, but to get, you know, everybody's got to get their shots. You got to pack up all the equipment into these boxes and ship them over, and, you know, the unit's just scrambling to make sure that everything everyone needs to do to get over, you know, training. In retrospect, you know, we could have used a lot more, you know, training on the range and whatnot, but there's so many other things to do. And then as it winds down towards the end, going off memory here, like the last month or something, you know, they try to give you a little more downtime with your families and whatnot. You know, I was, you know, young single guy. My family wasn't there, so the single guys with no families, you know, there other families amongst the soldiers either kind of like take them in or hang out, or we all go hang out together, and you know, a lot of drinking, obviously. So.
Yeah. So then, were you excited, kind of scared, not, or were you like, just like, let's get over there?
Yeah, I think it was a combination. I mean, you know, the culture and kind of how it works is, you know, you were taught and encouraged to think of it as like, this is my job, this is what I'm trained for. And so I think there was, amongst all of us, I mean, you know, differing some people were, you know, more scared than others, some people were more excited than others, but no question that I think to a person, everybody would rather just go over and start doing it. At some point, the waiting game becomes like a torture. Particularly what happens, you know, so one of the things that can happen is, you know, we knew we're deploying in like September, and then a date comes out. Okay, y'all are flying out like the 12th. No, y'all are flying out the 15th. No, y'all. So that can kind of be like torturous. But I think everybody just wanted to be like, this is what we've been talking about, thinking about training for last year. Even though we should have done a lot more training. Let's just get it over with and go. So yeah.
Then you left in October 2005.
Yeah.
What was that plane ride, or what was that traveling? Take us through that.
Yeah.
Like getting over there.
Yeah, it's a long plane ride. So it's a commercial airliner as they've been, I think, since I don't know if they did this in the Gulf War too, but they must have. Yeah, the charter commercial jet takes off from Fort Campbell, and so it's a long ride. You land in Germany, and then in Ireland, and then Germany. So we went through Shannon, and then we went through, I think, Germany, and then it lands in Kuwait. And the plane ride was crazy. I just have weird memory. I have like one or two memories from the plane ride, going there and coming back. And going there, I remember one of the first sergeants in the first sergeant of ALF Company. I was in Charlie Company, Tesser. I didn't know him. I'm this brand new, private, and he actually ended up getting killed. He was an ex-special forces guy, just like total badass, and everybody, feared and respected him. And it was just the weirdest moment. Like, he was sitting across from me or back, and he started yelling at his guys on the plane ride for doing something, and then he turned like to me and said something to the effect of like, "These idiots, am I right?" And I'm just thinking, like, why are you even saying that to me? I'm, like, he was saying it as if we were on the same level. It was just this moment, the weirdest. That's not how first sergeants talk to privates in the military typically, and it just stuck out to me. It just stuck in my head, and then I obviously ended up, getting killed. But so I remember that from the first plane ride going over there, and then you land in Kuwait, and Kuwait is I think we spent anywhere from like 2 to 3 weeks there, waiting to take the C-130 ride into Baghdad.
In those 2 to 3 weeks, were you like getting your equipment ready, learning the environment?
Ton of waiting. Yeah, I mean, you do some equipment checks. You get to go to the range. I think we went a couple times, but man, there's a ton of hurry up and wait. Because it's basically like the big army, has their system where they don't have enough planes and runway space and everything to just shove every infantry unit, into their base in Iraq whenever they want to go. It's got to be on a time schedule, combined with the fact that at every point, everybody has to be accounted for, the equipment has to be ready, and whatnot. So you're based on their schedule. So that's kind of a torturous rating game. Plenty of time for people to, play pranks on each other. And I actually I was one of the only guys in my platoon that didn't dip. And I actually attribute that to the fact that I was sleeping in my bunk in Kuwait one time, and Sergeant McDaniel, just like as a prank, just like dribbled a bunch in my mouth as I was like, so, and that's like the worst taste to wake up to in the world, just like gag for like an hour, and I think it just like made me like never want to dip again. So that was something that happened in Kuwait. Yeah,
we hear a lot about the pranks.
Oh yeah.
And the things you do.
Oh yeah.
They're pretty entertaining, actually.
Idle hands.
Yeah, it's true.
Compounded 100 times when it's a bunch of grunts. But,
true. Yeah. I bet. So after the 2-3 week period of wait, then you fly into Baghdad?
Yeah, we flew into BIOP, depending on the unit. So like a unit that would be stationed way up north of Mosul would definitely fly up there to the airport. But we were actually, for the initial point, based out of a base in like southwest Baghdad International Airport area. So we flew in there, and then just took little buses over to our forward operating base there. It wasn't until later in the deployment that we pushed out into the sector. But yeah, we kind of flew in there, and then you go to your section of the forward operating base in your tents, and then it's another little bit of a waiting game. So what happens then is you do what's called RIP, so relief in place for the unit that you're replacing. And what happens then is all the non-commissioned officers and the officers, they go out with the unit that's there. So we replaced the 48th National Guard Brigade from Georgia, who never should have been there like so many other National Guard brigades, not even, as much as we weren't trained for it. I mean, they were not, words can't describe how untrained they were for it, and that was just a phenomenon that was occurring across the country, these National Guard units. So they basically had taken some serious casualties in the sector and decided not to be present in the sector. So if our sector was like a certain area, they were going out and they got like blown up or shot, and then they just came back and hunkered down, which is understandable, but it actually makes the situation worse. I don't have a lot of formal training like the officers in counterinsurgency, but that's something we all know, that if you actually don't go out and be a presence and stop them from putting in an IED or driving wherever they want or sniping you, then they're just going to be building up their defenses and doing it there. So that's what happened there, because what happened, I remember, so we were there for like 3 weeks in our base in Biop, and we were just watching all the non-commissioned officers come and go out with this unit. And a couple of them got blown up like right away. They ended up being okay, but then one time one of them got blown up in I think a track or a Humvee, and the other 48th National Guard soldiers that were there with them, like one lost a foot and one died or something like that. And we were just like, holy shit, like what is this going to be? Is this going to just be like a massacre or something? And we were just a little worried about that. So so we were there for 3 weeks, and then we finally got to go out ourselves, like the third week or something like that.
And when you say go out, what do you mean?
So basically, you just go out on your first patrol. So it's it's the time period basically where all the buddy rides are over with the unit. They're not out there anymore, and then you basically go out, and they say this is our checkpoint, or this is where we drive, and you just start doing that. This is where we patrol. You start doing that. They're gone. You're there. So that first day we went out and just set up a hasty checkpoint along a dirt road for like a day or two, at least the guys I was with. Other guys went to this Iraqi Army base and just kind of fanned all out.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind, can you take us through some like of your daily, so you're in the field, I guess.
Yeah.
And like, what are some things you were doing, or some noteworthy things, or just like mainly what we do is less than 1% of the people I know are in the military. So it's basically sharing what it's like to be there and what you're feeling, and then if you experienced anything that you want to share.
Sure. Yeah. So the first kind of 2-3 months we were there, we were operating out of this base in Baghdad, which means we would go out and we would go on foot patrols and Humvee patrols, and we would be standby quick reaction force for this Iraqi Army compound, which means we would just kind of live in these hangars and ready to go out if somebody got in trouble. And day, 2 days, 3 days max, we would come back and refit at the main base. And then at the main base, we would do a lot of nighttime raids. So we would board helicopters and go hit a house. I don't think it took me too long to just start to feel like something was really, really off about what we were doing and how we were doing it. Not necessarily with my unit in particular, but just the whole situation over there. And a lot of it was just me being like totally naive, thinking that we're gonna go over there and like help all these people and kill bad guys and everything's gonna be fine. Quickly, kind of just and again, I didn't have the words at that point, but I just kind of quickly realized like this is just a totally fucked situation. And I think the reason that I felt that way is, at least in our sector, what happened a lot is we just played this cat and mouse game with these insurgents that we were hunting. Because at that point in the war, I mean, they knew that they couldn't, based on number of factors, our unit strength in the area and how we kind of operated, they kind of knew that they didn't have the manpower to just like overrun a base. But what they could do was put in IEDs and fire mortars at us and snipe at us, and then kind of melt back into the local village population. And they kind of were figuring that out. And so it was just this game of, on the one hand, the officers and the NCOs were trying to build relationships with like the local villagers, like, do you need water? So we tried to get this water treatment plant working, which I don't know if they ever got it working, that kind of thing. And on the other hand, like the 50-50, just trying to, the carrot and the stick, hunt these people, but they were just like ghosts. There were just and maybe some guys in the unit would dispute this, but they're just wrong. I understand why they would, but they killed and injured us far more than we killed and injured them. And for someone that's, in a unit, your whole job is to close with and destroy the enemy. That's like a form of kind of like psychological torture. So they, we'd be on a patrol, and they would just like start firing mortars at us, or someone would hit an ID or something like that. And there was a couple times where you could follow a command wire like back into a house, or you could see a spotter. But if we engage at that point, and different units, I think some people in my company did, but like you are basically saying, well, either this villager knew that this insurgent was emplacing this, or didn't know. Even if he knew, he didn't do it himself, and if he didn't know, and you're just taking that chance and killing that person just because you're mad. It's understandable if your buddy just gets blown up next to you, but it's just an impossible situation. So I describe all that to go back to what I was talking about originally, where we're being told by the officers, we're here to win hearts and minds. We are winning hearts and minds, and they have statistics, like this many mortars dug up and captured, and this many insurgents captured. And that's the other thing, we raid these houses all the time, and 9 times out of 10, the men are gone, so it's women and children there. But a lot of times men are there, but there's no evidence that they're insurgents. The only evidence they're insurgents is because like one farmer would be mad at another farmer and like tell the intel division that like that person's a terrorist, and like that happened all the time. And so you go there and you just, rough them up, zip cuff them, put them on the birds. They go to Abu Ghraib or wherever, and that's not really winning hearts and minds. To land and raid these houses, you have to land on their farm fields. They're all subsistence farmers. So you just trample the whole farm field and break the house. And so, it just kind of got to a point, and I think for differing levels, I think, there's always like one or two, true believers per platoon at that time. But I think for most of us in different ways, whether we would have admitted it in explicit terms or not, and some of us would, myself included, it was just this situation where you're being told you're doing a job or you have a mission, and you try to do what you're told to do. So if someone says, this is a terrorist house, we're going to hit this house, okay, we're going to do it the best way we can. After you do it a number of times, you start to think, is this right? Are we being told? So are the people that are telling us how to do this and what to do getting good information from the original source? Are they just doing what they're told from up the chain of command, that kind of thing? So, it just, it really impacts morale. Morale was devastated. They actually wrote there's a couple books about my deployment, my battalion's deployment. So Fiasco by Tom Ricks, at the end of the book, they talk about it. And Black Hearts by Jim Fredericks was our sister battalion, 1st Battalion. That was where, that was like the first high-profile case that happened in Iraq, where that psychopath, Stephen Green, one of the specialists, like raped and killed the family with his buddies, all of the news. We were searching for their bodies when the insurgents retaliated against them. But just kind of captures just the insanity of, I don't blame, and I don't think most of the guys would blame, the platoon sergeant, the first sergeant, the sergeant major, although our sergeant major was an asshole, but, or maybe the battalion commander. But basically, point being that, like, if you put a military unit that is designed and trained a certain way into a certain situation, and you say, hey, square peg, get in that round hole, what do you think is going to happen? Peg's going to get damaged. Everything's going to get damaged, right? So it's kind of how we felt, I think, a lot during the deployment. It wasn't, I want to make sure to say that, hearing me talk about it, people might think, oh my God, like, you guys are getting in firefights every day. It wasn't the case. We got into some, but compared to, other units around the country, compared to the Marines in Fallujah, compared to some of the guys in Tel Afar, Ramadi, different points in the war, compared to eastern Baghdad during the surge, we didn't have it too bad. Had it worse than some, better than others, I always like to say. So, yeah.
And so when you're in that first firefight, when you're really engaging with, I know that enemy is hard to see there all the time, right?
Yeah.
But what is that? Do you remember it vividly, or did you forget it, or like kind of black out? What was that first kind of, what was that on fire kind of thing?
Yeah, well, the first time I fired my weapon was the first day when we literally out in sector and manning this checkpoint, and this all just kind of ties back to my feelings of it. I remember this, and we take this checkpoint from the 48th National Guard unit, and it's just like 4 or 5 of us, one staff sergeant and me and the rest of the guys, and basically our job is, our Humvee is parked on this, paved road in the middle of nowhere, and then there's where we were these villages, these canals. So there were canal roads and canals. Every canal would have this like canal road above it, and it was just like this ridiculous maze, and they would actually use that to escape all the time. But we were basically told when we got there, okay, cars can come down here, and you stop them and turn them around. If a car comes down the canal road, do the same thing. Stop them. They know they're not supposed. They know they're not supposed to come down the road. What the fuck that means? And if they don't stop, you fire a warning shot. And then if they keep going, you shoot to kill, which kind of didn't make sense because it was a canal road. So even if it was a V-bid, I mean, if we were behind cover, it probably would have been all right. I mean, they don't like to detonate. The insurgents at that point, they didn't like to waste a V-bid on, detonating it from like 100 meters away or something like that, which was what it was. And so it was that first day, this car is coming down, everybody's yelling at to stop. It's coming down the canal road, and they're not stopping. And then Sergeant Short, who had an M14, just planked off a couple rounds, left to right of it. Maybe his aim was shit. I don't know. Didn't stop, and then he's like, light him up to me. And I was in the gun turret. I was a saw gunner the first time, and the saw I had iron sights, and this saw was my buddy's saw that had something called a 145, which is an optic for the saw. And it's pretty easy to use, but if you've never fired on it before, which I hadn't, you're not necessarily going to be as good a shot as you had. So basically, long story short, I let off a couple bursts aiming at I couldn't really see the driver, but I just aimed through the windshield. And I think the only reason I missed them was because it was the 145, and so I was putting this reticle on the windshield that wasn't where it was supposed to go. I didn't know. But it went really close because as soon as I shot, the car slammed on its brakes and just went in reverse as fast as it possibly could. And, I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but afterwards I was just thinking like, or way later, after the deployment or something, it's just like, were those insurgents trying to probe our position? Maybe. Way more likely it's just some confused family. Because why would an insurgent from that position, and it's hard to describe, it's hard to say this or justify this without having you see the situation, but basically there was no point to them doing that and risking getting killed, for it just didn't make sense. And so, looking back on it, at the time, or looking back on it, I should say now, I'm just, like I said, if it was my saw, I was a really good shot with the saw, I would have killed them, and then you kill a family, which some, guys did, and that's going to screw you up for life, no matter who you are, and it's just lucky that it wasn't. So that was the first time I shot, and then the first time that I really got shot at wasn't really close range, but what happened was, we went on this mission to clear this area. The mission was called Uday's Ghost, and it was called Uday's Ghost because Saddam's sons, Uday and Qusay, this was an area, it was about 40 kilometers southwest of Baghdad, and there were these these farmhouses that in the initial invasion in 2003, the Air Force just bombed to shit because they knew it was like one of Quday's palaces, and the word is that they used to use it, it's like a torture chamber and bring women back there or whatever, but so they were all just bombed out shells. So, but there was reports of insurgent activity in the area, and so we went to clear this area. So we landed in the birds and spent 2 days just clearing it, and my squad was in the lead the whole time. And then they were firing mortars at us, just crappy shots. We were trying to find them. It wasn't anything that was like crazy close. It was a little spooky, but the last day, my squad got put in the back. After we cleared this house, we went up to talk to this house, and this car peels out of the driveway, like as we're going up, just flies down the road. And then we start running up to the house and talking to the house, and everyone was like really spooked. Obviously, the car flying out, probably people that didn't want us to see him there. So after we get done clearing the house, the lieutenant orders us to my squad and another squad to hold up at this intersection where the house is at, and they continue down the road to try to clear it some more and find out where this car went. When they got, there was another platoon down there too. So when they got about maybe like quarter mile, half a mile maybe, from where we were down the road, these insurgents that were in this house next to the road and this canal just started opening up on them. And to this day, they say it's literally just a miracle that, I mean, notoriously a lot of insurgents can't shoot well, but it's a miracle that nobody got shot and killed. And the problem was when they all tried to take cover, they were facing the wrong way because the insurgents were shooting like this. The road goes like this, and the insurgents were shooting at this almost perpendicular angle to them. And they had no cover in the front, so they had to try to kind of find it. And we heard all this over the radio, and then the radio traffic went dead, and we couldn't raise anybody. We were starting to panic ourselves, be like, did everyone just get killed, blah, blah, blah. And then I just remember, like, you started to hear this little whizzing, like, and then it got, like, more intense. And what it was is we were probably right at the edge of the max effective range of these weapons. And so, I mean, it would have injured us if any of these rounds had hit us, but the rounds that the insurgents were shooting, like half a click down the road, were reaching, they were going by our friends and reaching us. And I just remembered looking, you could see dirt, like, kick up. And there was no cover for us. We were facing the wrong way. And I was laying on this berm this way, and the road was here, and I'm laying on this berm, and the rounds are coming this way. And I realized that, and I just remember, like, I was just laying on this berm, and I just was thinking to myself, like, I just visualizing just, like, pressing myself into the earth and just laying there, like, if a round hits me, it hits me. And they were just plinking around us and kicking up the dirt. Not a ton, but a few here and there. And then it stopped. And then it became, and then we got back on the radio that they had beaten them back, that they had shot a couple of them, and they found blood trails in the canal. But that was the first time that, like, really rounds were actually close. Yeah.
Do you get used to that adrenaline that comes with, like, patrols or night raids, or is it something that seems new every time? I'm wondering if, like,
does it get old?
Yeah, or
like,
not get old, or does it just become like the norm? Like, that first one is vivid.
Yeah.
And then, but as you're there, does it become kind of like you've experienced one, so does it, maybe does it get old, but
yeah,
does it become the norm?
It's funny, looking back, like, the first few are always, especially for the new guys, like, the most exciting thing in the world, and you get all amped up and play music and blah, blah, blah. And then, the more raids you go on that, your target's not there, your target's not the one you thought, and there's no fire exchange, you start to, what they say is get complacent. And that's the job of the sergeants and officer, to make sure that all the grunts who are going on, like, the 10th raid, and they're like, nothing's going to happen on this raid, god damn it, like, nothing happened on the last 9. That can be very dangerous. And, of course, I didn't realize it at the time as a stupid, private kid, and most of the others don't, but it just takes one time. So we never got shot during a raid, but the first platoon did. We all went to the exact same places. We were just, we're going to different places, different times, and it was just, on the day they went there, they caught them red-handed, because these insurgents going in, going out, trying to avoid us. And so what would happen is, we would kind of get complacent like that a little bit, but then, and I always wondered if the S2 intelligence operator, if our officers did this to us intentionally, they would, come up with these brand new stories. Like, this guy is like the number 5 guy in Iraq. They say he's there. Everybody better be on their shit and ready to go. And then we were all like, oh, okay, like, So I think they kind of did that in a certain way, whether they intended it or not, to kind of keep us, like, in the zone, that kind of thing. But even when it had lost the excitement of the first ones, when you're going on, depending on deployment, like, different raids, and, like, nothing's happening, or it's women and children, that the rush of, getting on the bird landing, run up to the house, hit the house, that's always, and if anyone tells you different, they're lying. I mean, that is always a huge adrenaline rush, that moment itself.
So. wondering, like, what were your interactions like? Well, first question is, what were your interactions like with either the Iraqi army or civilians? And the second, I'm also wondering what you did in your downtime. Like,
Sure.
so,
Sure. We didn't encounter a ton of civilians. At first, we encountered some. We encountered a lot more once we, after about 3 months, we kind of moved off of the forward operating base into this Sheikh's house, this Sheikh's mansion, which would be like a, like moderate-sized large house in Denver, which is like a crazy mansion over there. And when we were there, we would do a lot of different patrols around the area and everything, and interact with villagers. And so one of the stations that one of the things we had once we had that patrol base was this traffic checkpoint that was like a couple miles down the road. And there were these neighbors there. And I think this is just kind of like the sick irony of Iraq. I think we had like 2 or 3 months prior to that, like raided their house. And like, I don't know if we sent the man of the house to prison or if he was there, but like it became, they would, so we had this traffic checkpoint where like we lived in this tiny little house, and then there were 2 traffic checkpoints, and platoons would rotate in and out, go back to the patrol base, and then once every couple weeks go back to the main base. At this little traffic checkpoint, this neighbor would sneak us food every day. The kid knew that if people saw him and the wife, if people saw them bringing food to us, it would be marked for death. But they would sneak us food, yeah, that was amazing. We got to talk to them a lot, or a little bit anyway. I was one of the guys in the platoon that actually got, certainly not interpreter level, not even close, but that could carry on a basic conversation in Arabic, like bare bones basic. And so I like to try to practice that with like locals we encountered. There's just such a cultural divide, and there's such a power dynamic where like, unless we were on our downtime at like the Iraqi Army base and just, joking with them, if we were out in sector, it was difficult for us to have like real, any kind of deep conversations with any of the Iraqi locals, and it also wasn't our job. I mean, we, most of the time interaction that would happen would be like the lieutenant or the platoon sergeant going out to a house to meet a sheikh and talk to them, and our job is to like protect them. And so, but beyond that, with the Iraqi army, that was the other thing. I just, and I encountered the same thing on my second deployment. I just could not, and again, in my own stupid naivete, just could not believe how undisciplined they were and poorly trained. And we had we had a general order number 1 in place throughout the deployment, that meant, and our first sergeant, there's so many other like crazy sub stories to this, to my experience, but our first sergeant was like a born again Christian, which is like the worst thing you can be in an infantry unit, because you're asking guys to just go through hell, and then you're gonna yell at them for having like a porno mag or booze, and that was this guy. So he found a bunch of pornography after someone died huffing canned air, and then they did a huge search, and he found pornography, and they charged people with Article 15s because you're not allowed to have that in country. And the reasoning behind why you're not allowed to have it in country is because it's offensive to the local population. And that was kind of confusing to us because we ended up trading a massive amount of pornography to the Iraqi army for food that we wanted, and they loved it. So never really understood that much. But yeah, not a ton of interaction with them. I mean, a little bit here and there, but what really just turned me off to them for good was when we had this like mass casualty event where mortars landed in the patrol base and knocked out a bunch of guys, and we were trying to take care of all the wounded. They were just what we call combat ineffective, which means they were just lying down, crying, and not dying. I mean, these are guys that just like me, just get like peppered with shrapnel, and you're fine. You can still walk and do things, and they just couldn't do it. We had to kick them out of the way of the doorways, and it was just like these. I just remember thinking at that point, like, and it happened. I just did it. I just remember thinking like, the insurgents are going to tear through these people like cheese when we leave, and they did. So, yeah.
mentioned, well, drinking and porno magazines. And so, what is downtime like?
Downtime, yeah. It's so it all would depend kind of on the nature of where we're at in the deployment. So, like I said, for the first 3 months, we would go out for a day, 2 days, whatever, and then come back for a few, day or two, whatever. That's what they call operational tempo. How many times you go out, how often. It wasn't that high, but then they ramp it up as the deployment goes on, and so downtime on the main base, this main fob, which to us later in the deployment was like this luxury palace because we only got to go back to it like once every 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, they had a big gym and you could go do that. They had like a rec tent. You go play video games, all that crap. But a lot of guys, it's basically some combination of like 5 or 6 things always. Like writing letters home, reading, writing, journal. Watching movies, huge deal. Cleaning your weapon over and over and over again, all your equipment, cleaning. Working out as much as you can, and just messing with each other and fighting with each other whenever you can. Those things just over and over and over again. I personally, I kept a lot of journals. I haven't kept a journal since. I have stacks and stacks of them in my storage at my folks' place back east. I did that, and I read a lot. I like to read. I had like books on tape, and I had, just different kind of books I read and whatnot. And tried to work out, whenever I can, and join in all the pranks whenever I could, and that kind of thing too. So that's basically what downtime consisted of. Yeah.
So you were there in the East Baghdad area?
So this was, they call it to this day Southwest Baghdad, but that would be like calling, I'm trying to think, that would be like calling like Lakeview or like even like south of Aurora, like what's south of Aurora? So basically it would be like calling a suburb of Denver that was like 15-ish miles in any direction from Denver that was like rural. It'd be calling that Denver. So, I mean, maybe technically on a map or a political map, but like for all practical intents and purposes, like we were in small farmland villages that were actually along the Euphrates, probably within the Baghdad County or whatever the equivalent is, but not the city itself. Yeah.
So before you go on to like when you returned, is there anything about that first deployment that really sticks out, or that you also kind of focus on how you remember your experience? Anything about that first deployment that you'd like to say before we go into the?
I mean, I think it, and I always say this, like it took me a while to really get the words right for this because like when I talk about it, my experience, how it affected me, it has to do with where I was in Iraq, what unit I was with, and what we did and all that, and what happened at that time in our unit. And so if I say like based on that I felt X about Iraq, or I didn't want to reenlist or whatever, that's just isolated to my experience. And another unit or another person that had a different experience with a different unit in a different location, even if they saw more action, might have a totally different perspective just based on their chain of command and everything. So what I took from that point first and foremost is, I was a guy coming in that, I didn't know if I was going to spend my career in the military, but I was really passionate about it and wanted to go to all these schools in the military. I wanted to, go to different units and earn this badge, blah, blah, and during and after that deployment, I was like, I want to get out of the military as, fast as humanly possible. And I ended up getting stop loss for my second tour. So I just remember it as a total disillusionment deployment that basically made me, for a while, just like, toxically cynical about Iraq, about the military, about myself, thinking that, just how naive and kind of stupid I was. And, it just made me like really angry at, what could happen. I mean, some of the guys that were in our unit is the same ones I talked to you about in basic training. There were guys in my unit that never should have had a rifle. I mean, guys that the platoon knew not to trust and the sergeants knew not to trust, but they were just there because Big Army just made them be there and you couldn't get rid of them. But there were other guys that were some of the best, the old cliche, like the most brave, honorable men, I'll ever know. And watching them, I was personally, I guess, fortunate where none of the guys in my platoon died. My lieutenant, my, you know, um, squad leader, team leader, they all got hurt badly, but they didn't die. Other guys in other platoons, so people died. But just watching them get, my lieutenant, he had 3 Purple Hearts, and then they pulled him from the country because the regulations you can't have more than 3, so they made him go back, and he didn't like it. And I just remember the last time he got blown up, he was walking for me because thought I looked tired or something like that. But like overall from the deployment, I just remember thinking, as I said, this is not what I expected. Iraq is not what I expected. It's not what it's being portrayed in the media as. It's not what it's being portrayed by the leaders as, at least where we were. And also for myself, I kind of realized, and it actually took me a long time to kind of realize this, lots of people, I serve a lot of people that were certainly, I don't consider myself above average, anything really above average intelligence. I serve a lot of people that were smarter than me and certainly more capable at being a good soldier than I was in a million different ways. And I knew that they saw and it felt and agreed with everything that I did about our mission over there, how it actually worked, whether it was worth it, the whole situation. They were able to compartmentalize that and somehow not let it bother them to the point where they would say, I'm not going to re-enlist now. There were others of us who were different, and I was just one of the different ones where I just took it, which I probably shouldn't have, just too personally. This was just something that ruined the military for me, basically. And again, it took me a long time after that to kind of realize that was my experience there, and it's no less valid, but it doesn't stand for the proposition that the military is X, Iraq is X, Iraq war is X. It was just what I experienced, but I kind of look at that first deployment as kind of standing for all that, I would say, kind of overall, yeah.
So you went home, was it that following October?
Yeah, I think it was, I always get the months wrong. It was either October or September 2006.
Long flight back.
Yeah.
And same through Germany, Ireland, and home?
Yeah, I remember, that happened the second time, but I remember, and again, this is just one of those funny things in the military. I mean, they can make you so after going through a deployment like that, something ridiculous happened on the plane that made me as scared as I had been at any point in Iraq, which is just dumb. And that was that I was getting off the bus to get on the plane in Kuwait, and everybody has to be. The only way this thing can work is if everyone is relatively uniform in the sense that put your helmet here on your bag. You know what I mean? There's too much variation. It just doesn't work. So I had my helmet clipped onto I think my computer case or something like that, and it got caught on the bus and pulled so that the chin buckle split. And I was like, oh, whatever. Who cares? Nobody cares, right? And then we're on the plane, and before we hit Ireland, we got word through chain of command that the commanding general will greet every single soldier coming off the plane and shake your hand at Fort Campbell, and you better have this is just they call it Big Army. The Special Ops community is way better about this, but it's just you will have a clean helmet cover and this and that, and everyone's just what? Why don't we make it extra clean on the plane with the cleaning stuff I don't have? But I was just terrified because I'm the only guy. I can't. I'm gonna have having your chin strap unbuckled. It's the quintessential image of Vietnam, but it is someone will one of the NCOs will kill you if they see it because like I said, you get blown up and hit your head. It's just wrong. It's just wrong. You see it, it's wrong. And so I couldn't buckle it. And we got to Ireland, and I'm in the gift shop, and I'm I have to find something to fix this. I'm just I'm going to go down there with an unstrapped chin buckle, and the general's going to shake my hand, and the sergeant major is literally going to kill me. And I found this glue in the gift shop, and I glue it before I'm getting on the plane. And I remember on the plane, it was moving around, so I did it, I tested it, I followed the directions, and it was good. And then it split again, and I was just I'm totally screwed. And I did it one more time. I glued it. I held it for double the time, and it held. And I get off there, and I'm like shaking their hand, and then like a few minutes later, it's like split open. But I just remember again, like I mentioned the thing I remember from the first plane ride. The it's just one of those. It's just one of those things. Like only people in the military, in the big army, understand. It's like, why would you be more afraid of that after almost dying a bunch of times? But it's how they train you. Like so. That's what I remember about the plane ride. Yeah, and then we landed in Fort Campbell, and I told my family this both times. They bring a lot of families in this huge hangar, and you go and they march in, and then they like march into the hangar, and then they say, "Okay, families, like come," and everyone like swarms. But I told my families not to come out because I was just gonna go right. Everybody that wasn't from there goes on leave for like a week or two once you get back, and so I was like, "There's no point to you coming out here." And then I had to get them to promise not to do it. So we did that, and then my buddy, my team leader in my squad, like all the single guys that aren't from there, some family takes them in, like go get you clothes and come back and eat with us, that kind of thing. So yeah, and then it's the same after every deployment in the military. You do. I forget what the acronym is now, but it's basically like your post-deployment automatic crap. You have to do 2 weeks of, no, I will not kill myself. You go back to the medical tent, get all your shots, all these briefings about like, don't beat your wife, don't get drunk, and this and that, and it's literally like 10 days of that. So you go through that too. So turn in the equipment, clean all the equipment, turn it in, blah blah. So yeah, you have to do all that before they let you on leave. Yeah. So yeah.
So then you went home for a week?
Yeah, I went home for a week. I skipped those. So I did mid-tour leave. You get mid-tour. I went on leave for a couple weeks in the deployment too. But yeah, I went back home. Yeah. But then I went home. I went home. It was like September, October, and then again for like Thanksgiving and Christmas or something like. I think I maybe combined Thanksgiving like. We landed in like October or something like that, and then it took a couple weeks. So I went home. Took like 2 or 3 weeks of leave to cover Thanksgiving. Went back for Christmas, that kind of thing. So yeah. So I can't remember how I did exactly.
So what was that like being with your family after?
I mean, it was it's weird a little bit, but it was great. I mean, my family was I was really lucky. There's a lot of guys that are in the military with pretty crappy family situations and pretty crappy like spousal situations or girlfriend or whatever, where there's like a divorce or just the family is not very understanding or not really doing what they need to do in terms of helping to like support the the son or whatever in the military. Mine was great. My mom, my family was certainly against me joining and like really against the war, but really, really supportive. And so, when I got back, they were really good about just kind of giving me my space. If I wanted to go, hang out with my friends and drink some beers, they were fine. Come back late and whatnot. But it was just great to see them. I never felt, me personally, I never felt like really detached from them. Now, or like angry at them for not understanding this or that. And granted, like a lot of that is probably because, they're smart. They didn't ask dumb questions. They didn't make it awkward. It just kind of worked. So it was really good to see them. So, yeah.
And so did you say you did re-enlist?
No, I got I got stop loss. So I don't know how much you know about stop loss, but they started. What basically happened is, I don't know. I think They did it for my deployment. So in my deployment, the first one, the guys that were over there with us, that had been in what they call the initial push, the 2003 invasion, they were stop loss for this first deployment, and then I was stop loss for the second. And the reason they started doing stop loss is because in Iraq, in 2003, initially, like 3-4 months after the invasion, the Pentagon started letting guys go home. Same thing happened in Vietnam. So if you were over there and you're like, well, my enlistment's up, they're like, okay, go home. And then all of a sudden they realize, holy crap, we're going to be here for a long time, and we don't have enough guys. And they panic, and they institute the stop loss program, which basically meant that like if you are deployed and and your out of the military date falls somewhere in your deployment, you got to finish out the deployment. In fact, they usually do like a 90 or 30-day buffer zone. I'm trying to remember when I was in 90 or 30-day buffer zone, which means if you're scheduled to get out of the military on September 1st, and your unit is deploying like September 14th, you have to go on the deployment. It's insane. I mean, I consider myself lucky in the sense that mine fell in the middle, so my get out of the military date was halfway through my second deployment, which is pretty standard. So I was stop loss to go on that deployment, basically.
So, for your second deployment?
Yeah.
Was how long after?
So it was about a year. Just about, yeah.
And you were doing more training in that time?
Yeah. So I got made pretty soon after we got back. They made me, they call it the company RTO, which is the captain's radio man. The way it's supposed to be on paper is that every infantry company is supposed to have a 26 series, which is a soldier that is trained in communications and satellite, that's assigned to the company, that is the captain's radio man. They never have enough. So a lot of times they just have to make one of the soldiers do that, which is bad because I don't have any formal technical training, and they're just like, learn what you can, like read all these manuals. I had this huge commo shop to myself. I'm just like, I have no idea how this stuff works. And so you just have to like learn what I can. So they made me that, and so I didn't train with a platoon, my platoon or any platoon. For that year, I was in headquarters platoon. So as the captain's radio man, I was going on the company training missions, but I was always doing all the communication stuff, setting up the antennas, working with all the platoon radio guys and all that, and running around with the captain. That was my training, and then getting range time where I could. And then once we deployed the second time, after about 2-3 months, the first sergeant put me back down a line unit, and then he said, I actually liked him a lot. He told me later he only did it because he didn't realize I wasn't going to re-enlist. He thought I was going to re-enlist, and so if you want to re-enlist, it looks better to be on a line unit. But then when he found out, he's like, I never would have kicked you back. But so that's what I did for the year that we were back in training. I was just the captain's radio guy. So, yeah.
And then you deployed again?
Yeah, in 2007. I think in again September, October time frame. Yeah.
And was that second deployment? What's the major differences? Or?
Yeah, it was really different. So it was during the surge, and during the surge, a lot of the country was a lot better off, less enemy fire. Some was worse off, but we were in an area where basically, a lot of the insurgents have been pushed out because the Sunni awakening councils were there. So they're these former Sunni insurgents that we would now pay to have their own little checkpoints and their own little bands of militias that were on our side. And so they were just everywhere. We spent so much time training them and going around checking on them, being like, put your weapon on safe, don't accidentally fire, you idiot. And so there was a lot less worry about, enemy fire, even though there was some at the beginning, first 2-3 months, some of the platoons took casualties, but light stuff, took some sniper fire. But that deployment was really just all about, like I said, like supervising and training the awakening councils, making sure the insurgents stayed out. There was only one big mission that the battalion went on like 2 months in to clear this whole village. That was kind of that was intense. They were just like clearing this village that most of the insurgents had left, but there was just like the Air Force was like bombing these caches, and it was just like smoke everywhere, and it was just ridiculous. And then one other big operation we called Shitty Christmas, which is where one of my buddies lost both his legs. And I remember I went to the briefing, the battalion briefing, because I was the company RTO, and afterwards I got my CO at the time, Captain Nash. He admitted to me in a bar when we were both drinking, like years afterwards, that it was a bullshit mission that battalion staff came up with, just because they needed a mission. And basically the mission was like go like 10 or 20 clicks outside your sector into this desert area west of where you are, and protect our 1st Brigade Alpha Company of 327 1st Brigade. So it's like a whole other unit in our division that's building a patrol base, like as if we needed to protect them from like hordes of insurgents, but like it was the middle of nowhere and there's nobody out there. What there was out there was a ton of unexploded ordnance from the first Gulf War and a bunch of IEDs that they seized. And so when we were out there, guys hit. We didn't hit them at first. Different platoons hit IEDs. It didn't hurt anybody that bad. Ringing ears, scrapes, but like it was just like didn't capture a bunch of insurgents. Didn't arrest them trying to get at Alpha Company. And then when we were leaving, the second platoon the platoon I've been with the first time, I knew a lot of the guys that stayed in. Leon was one of the guys. He was a corporal now, I think. So they were headed out, and they hit like this huge IED, and I was back taking down this antenna at the command point. They were probably like a kilometer away, and just see it, and you hear over the radio and call in the medevac. But at that time, we knew how bad it was, and that was just like that was ridiculous. The one thing I kind of felt bad about for that is like we got back and my headquarters platoon sergeant, who I couldn't stand, I guess we eventually made up, but he was like, listen, man, he's like, I don't want to make any of the new guys clean out that Humvee. Like, can you go do that? And I somehow like got out of it. Like I just was like, I forget what I did. I think I told 2 other guys to do it or something like that, which I really regret. It was these like 2 new guys, having to like clean this giant bloody Humvee. Wish I hadn't done that, but that and that huge Christmas operation were 2 things I remember from that deployment. Another thing I remember from that deployment is on that that stupid operation before the Christmas one, we were clearing this village, and we were behind the Iraqi army, and they were just going forward, like clearing each house and chasing the insurgents out, and they were ADing, accidental discharging. They're idiots. We come up to this one house, and it's clear that some insurgents had just been there. And I say, I hate the Army and the military's practice of just being like, this is an insurgent, blah, blah. But sometimes in a case like that, civilians know that if they just stay in the house and they don't have anything they shouldn't have, which is basically like any IED equipment or, like a, PK, I can't remember what it was, like a Syrian sniper rifle. If they just have their AK, we're not going to arrest them for that. But if a house was abandoned and it was like freshly, you knew that AQI was there. So we came upon this house that, there's a cooking fire still going, and there's this like motorcycle that was still running, and there's like nobody there. Everybody, intel said that they were there. So the Iraqi army, this captain like tells the soldier to like destroy it. So the soldier standing 40, 50 feet from this motorcycle just starts opening up, a running motorcycle just starts opening up with an AK on it. The motorcycle has gasoline in it. And so I just grabbed this idiot Iraqi soldier, and I'm like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? You're going to blow up that motorcycle and hurt everybody. And then the Iraqi captain, like got in my face and tried to like say that he outranked me. And I just remember I'm like, this flag outranks all of you. You're all incompetent. Like your guy, as usual, just almost getting people killed. But then, so we were looking around the house. We saw like these wires and everything. And it was me, the lieutenant. I was back on the line at this point. Me and my lieutenant, and Lieutenant Roberts, and the interpreter. And we were standing right next to each other as far as we are here. And all of a sudden, just like, boom, this poof goes out. And it ended up being a small IED that like didn't blow out our hearing when we had like ringing. And what it was it went off like right under the interpreter, and me and him were just standing in a dust cloud. And we're looking at it afterwards, and they had planted it. The insurgents had planted it backwards. So they set it up so that when it triggered, all of the nails and everything would shoot into the ground instead of up. Which is probably the only reason that, we didn't get our legs and ankles all fucked up. But I just, just one of those things. So those are like the things I remember mostly from that deployment. All in all, though, it was a lot of downtime. Way less concern about enemy activity.
And that was a full year deployment for you?
That was a full year, yeah.
So then you got out in 2008?
Yeah, so I got back, and basically, like, for guys that were stop loss when you get back, you know, it takes a minimum of like 2 or 3 months after you get back, a minimum to like do the post-deployment stuff, and then to out-process the military, all your appointments, your medical appointments, turning on equipment. And so I basically spent that time doing that. It's real, you know, usually the unit takes it easy on you to stop loss guys. They're like, just, you know, do what you want. You don't have to, you know, just go to your appointments and whatnot. So I spent that time doing that. I had also gotten really into combatives. It's like the Army martial arts. In between the deployments, I did a lot of training with it. I competed in the all-Army tournament, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then so during that time, I did a lot of training because I actually did some more competitions and an MMA match or two, like when I was getting out. So I had like that 3 or 4 months just to train. And then when I was ready to go on my terminal leave and get out, I packed up my pickup truck and drove it from Tennessee to Massachusetts. At that point, I had just turned 23. Yeah.
So what was that kind of the initial kind of like, you're out of the Army now, what do you do?
Well, I remember driving out in my truck, and I just remember, like, I can't remember what music I played, but the feeling was just like, yeah, I mean, it was just, like I just like started screaming from happiness or something. I just drove back, and then I just remember my trip home. I drove through the eastern part of Kentucky on the Parkway, and they just had this crazy ice storm. And it must have been, it was February, and there were these cars on the side of the road just like encased in ice. I just remember thinking, like, what, you know, people like abandon their cars. Drive through, ended up actually picking up a hitchhiker at a gas station in West Virginia. This guy trying to get to Massachusetts, he rode the rest of the way with me. And then when I got back home, yeah, I was just, I mean, I knew, you know, I had a rough idea. I knew I was going back to school eventually. But, and then I knew I'd, you know, get an apartment. I knew kind of I had to do these things, but I didn't have at that point like a deadline for them. And so I got back and started living with my mom again from March, April, for about 3 months. I moved in my apartment in May. And during that time, so I remember what I did. My uncle in San Francisco asked me to house sit for him for like 3 weeks, something like that. So I think that was March. I think March or April. March. It was March. And so this is 2009 now. And so I went out there for, you know, by myself, 3 weeks house sitting for him. Came back and you know, just I'm trying to remember exactly what I did. Saw a lot of friends, went on some trips and hiking and whatnot. Went down to see friends in New York, and then, you know, leading up to, you know, April and May was getting more formalized with getting into school and getting an apartment and whatnot. So I got into UMass Boston, and then I got an apartment in Quincy, which is just south of Boston, and did that until I graduated.
How was it transitioning back to being a civilian?
You know, I think that I think people oversimplify it a lot. It's so complicated in terms of, like, you know, who you are before you go in, what your military experience is like, what your family experience is like, where you go in the country, blah 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 blah, right? And so I think for me, you know, it's by no means like a cakewalk. It's very weird. But I think what I did for me is I just didn't think about it, and I just, you know, once I was in school, I mean, I was just like, I mean, I graduated in like 3 years, working in school, doing all this other crap. Never really took the time to just think about it. I just stayed busy. But it was definitely weird, and I remember, you know, it went away after like a year or two, but I just remember, you know, there was, you know, I drove like a maniac, which I guess is pretty common among vets, I guess. You know, I had my cousin, my brother one time, we got in this accident coming back from a ski trip where, you know, it's like snow on the road, it was just a fender bender, and they like confronted me afterwards, and they were really scared, and they were like, "We're scared to drive with you," and I was like, "Oh my God," you know, so like, look at that. But like, drove like a maniac, was quick to anger, not quick to anger, just like, you know, so, which wasn't a good idea. Wasn't a good idea. I worked all through school at like bars, like bouncing and stuff, which is just like not what vets should be doing. Just like, you know, police. I just heard a story today about police. I mean, I know they recruit vets. Like third of all police are vets. A lot of Iraq, Afghanistan. So you don't think about it, and you know, so in that instance, I was like, you know, really too quick to anger, but and then like, you know, I remember, you know, it was like one 4th of July, I was seeing this girl in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and like all these kids around the neighborhood started setting off fireworks. It just like really, you know, upset me, spooked me out. But that was like the first couple of years, maybe 2-3 years after being out, you know, and it got better, in which I tried to tell other vets that it, you know, it gets better. You got to give it time. You know, I mean, there's certainly like, you know, if you were in like, you know, a day-long firefight and, you know, people to the left and right of you died, then like it might not get better. Maybe it'll take like 30 years. You know, the way I look at my experience, like, you know, something sounds like a mortar, it's always going to make me like flinch, but it's not going to make me go into a full-blown panic attack. That's just where I'm at now. So I think, you know, that I was really lucky also in the sense of my family and my friends and the people I met in school, other vets, professors, really took me under their wing, that kind of thing. A lot of people aren't that lucky. You know, the isolation is really what can do it. You know, I saw other vets that, you know, I was friends with and stuff at UMass, you know, like drop out or this or that because, you know, they don't have family around here, and maybe they, you know, don't get along with other people at school. They're not good at talking to civilians or anything, and that's just isolating, and isolation is the worst. So I was really lucky to not have that. Very social, lots of things going on, that kind of thing. So kind of helped with the transition, I think. Yeah.
So now you're sitting at almost 10 years out, and you did mention when you were talking earlier that you have done speaking engagements or talking about. I guess over the last 10 years, is there a certain way of talking about it, or you're feeling this change, or just how do you live? One thing we look at is what people do in wartime, but then what does the war do to them? So just, if you could, we have about, I'm just letting you 30 minutes if you have the time. Just talk about what are your memories, how does the war still live with you in some ways, or not at all?
You know, I've always had, you know, it's my best theory on it, and I don't know if it's true or not or it's the case, but like, I had a VA doc tell me one time that, like, you know, I think you have post-traumatic stress disorder, and I was actually working for a vet's mental health clinic at the time, so I know what it is and the symptoms and the diagnosis and what the qualifications are and all that, and I was just like arguing about it, and then he was like, maybe I think you're right here. You have you know, like every single combat veteran probably has adjustment disorder technically, and then PTSD is like here. And I think one of the things that kind of kept me out of that zone was everything I mentioned, family, friends, all that. But also, when I was in college, I took a course called War in American Culture that was taught by a professor named Paul Atwood, who was a Vietnam era veteran. I don't think he fought in Vietnam, he was in the Marines. But he was a professor, and his whole thing is a history professor. He's in a couple books. But he's, you know, on the academic anti-war side, and he's very far, you know, radical in that way. And the class was basically about, you know, what is the popular narrative of war, what is the cultural narrative of war, how does that compare to the actual experiences of vets. And there's a lot of vets that go to University of Massachusetts, Boston. It's like tons of vets go there. And vets that take the course have a lot of different reactions sometimes. Some of them just get mad, drop it, they argue with him, and they drop it. There's some other vets, he says that take it and it just kind of clicks. I took that course, and I felt like, you know, what I've been thinking or trying to put into words or trying to say was kind of here in the way I wanted to, you know, experience it. So I became friends with him. I wrote a couple things for I forget what it's called, but like my final capstone thesis, whatever, that he like published. And then he got me involved with this group called Vets for Peace, which I've been involved with now for 7 years. And doing that and being able to do that kind of work and kind of put my experiences into writing and advocacy and public speaking engagements, protests, whole 9 yards, really helped me make sense of the experience and think that it wasn't for nothing. For me, what it did was it basically, I thought to myself, I know for a fact that we did more harm than good over there. We didn't really get to do the classic, infantry job. It was just this, death by attrition butcher shop, and there was just nothing good. We made it worse over there. We got hurt. Just all sucks. It's all for nothing. And that's pretty hard to take. I think a lot of guys I serve with, some of them don't think that and will just never agree about it. But a lot that do just cannot. They will not touch it, even though that is the reality. And so for me, being introduced to kind of the anti-war movement and the peace movement was a way for me to kind of put all that negative energy to some positive use. And I did. I got really heavily involved with Vets for Peace, Iraq Veterans Against the War. And then I actually started working at a veterans mental health clinic called the Home Base Program, which is run by the Red Sox and Mass General Hospital. They partner with the Wounded Warrior Project now to do these national mental health programs and training, and that was also very cathartic, being able to help other vets in that way. That was huge for me. I look back on it now. I struggled for a lot of years because I just felt like, I was a young, pretty immature, like so many other young soldiers at that time, and I wonder, what if I had done this differently, or behaved differently, or gone this way, or done that? Would I have prevented this guy from getting hurt? Would I have killed that insurgent? Blah blah blah. And I've realized that that's a very dangerous game that a lot of vets play that can kind of drive you insane, and you don't want to do it, and you got to make peace with it at some point, because a good metric, I kind of have thought, you're never your own best judge of your character, I think. And a good metric is, do the guys in your unit platoon, will they still talk to you? They back you up? Would they still do anything for you? And I would do that for them, and I know that they do that for me. Versus other guys in platoon, there was guys that quit in Iraq, or they're just blacklisted for life. That's the difference. You might not have been the best soldier you could be, but you would have done anything for your buddies or anything like that. So I've tried to make peace with that, and I've tried to, balance. It's been tough in law school. One of the struggles, I'm still involved in all these vets organizations and these other vet organizations that I'm recently involved with. It's pretty major stuff. Lobbying in D.C. We've been on a couple of lobbying trips to allow for Iraqi and Afghanistan interpreters that worked with us to come over here, the special visas, which they're trying to politicize and kill. Being involved with those groups is huge to try to put some positive spin on it. Our interpreter was killed waiting for a special visa. And so, I think at this point, 10 years out, I look back on it and I say, okay, there are truths to it that, you can kind of try to sugarcoat. It doesn't affect that there are truths. Now, just because something is true does not mean that you can't handle it, or you're going to wallow in despair and you can't make good of it. So I know, in my bones, for a fact, and my second deployment, my squad leader got mad at me because I read Fiasco by Tom Ricks, all this, all the veteran military journalists and ex-military people that were writing scholarly works on how completely fucked the entire war was, and how. So I can know that. I can know that what I did had not only nothing to do with keeping America more safe, but actually made it less safe because they destabilized the country, terrorized the population, created a vacuum, ISIS, blah blah blah. So that is just true, and that's hard to take. I can know that and still say, you know what? Now over here, I can try to use my experience and what I did not for, look at me, I'm a veteran, give me free shit, but listen to my warning. Not me, I'm just one speck. Listen to all of us. I want to be a part of the side that is saying, the legacy of Vietnam Veterans Against the War and everything, the side that's saying, let's never, ever, ever do this again. And that is what, not only kind of gives me a lot of meaning now, but allows me to be okay with the experience. That's what allows me to not get into places that I've seen so many other vets get into, just really bad places. And that's kind of, I think, where I'm at right now. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have any questions. I think we pretty much answered all the things I usually ask then.
Sure.
So I'll go ahead. Do you have anything you want to add?
Thing I want to add.
And again, if you realize later that there are stories you didn't tell that you want to,
Sure.
you can do an audio recording sometime. You can do, so this doesn't have to be the end of your
Sure,
story.
sure.
So if there's something coming up and it comes up later, just know there's nothing for that. But if you can.
Yeah, I think, as bad as I made it sound, again, not only did, other guys have it worse, but, when I think of the guys in, like, Vietnam, and one of the most uncomfortable experiences for me has been, like, in some of the veterans groups I'm in, they're, like, Vietnam combat vets that, experienced way worse than we do, and they, and one of them told me one time, like, you guys had it worse because at least we could have, we could sneak booze and drugs and women, all stuff, and, discipline was a little laxer, and you guys are on such a tight leash. I know you guys can't have anything over there, and I just remember thinking, like, yeah, but compared to what you guys went through, so they say that, some people will say that, like, every grunt's, a bunch of my buddies like this, like, if you're a grunt in one war, you're connected to the grunt in the other war, like this bond. It doesn't matter what the war is or what time it is, and on some level that's true, but on another level, like, what I experienced and what anybody in Iraq experienced is very. I try to remind myself compared to what guys in Omaha Beach and the Battle of the Bulge and Khe Sanh and Hue City, the worst of the old wars experienced. It's really not that bad. I mean, when we had our mass cal and I got hit, you're getting medevaced like that to a hospital in a tent that is the functional equivalent of a hospital in Denver or Boston. It has an MRI and a CAT scan and everything, and just how lucky we were to have that kind of stuff. Makes me think about that. But
Do you have any lingering?
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Lingering physically just like that.
Yeah, no. I mean, I got lucky. I got a piece of shrapnel that went in my neck, but it went in between my vertebrae, so. Still in there.
All right.
Yeah.
Carrying it around with you.
Yeah, it's really small. I mean, it's tiny, but that. I think I'd also say I got really. I've never been a religious person, but I've always tried to be, as respectful as possible with people that are. But then I had my boss, who is one of my best friends now, at this veterans mental health program that I worked with. He was a Marine in Afghanistan, and he would, we would go to these events as part of this mental health program all the time. You go to VFWs, and we go to, student veteran vets, veteran appreciation breakfast, on and on, and have prayer and everything for it. And he would refuse to just like bow his head. He would refuse. He would explode on anyone that told him to. And I just remember he he really gave me like the courage to just be like, you know what, that's right. That's the right way to do it. Because, you know, when I think back to that mass coming, the guy standing next to me, or 5 feet from me, that when we got blown up, I landed on top of Barnes. He got shrapnel all up in his head that made him, I mean, he had like a 10-year, he was on like specials. He did like a 10-year recovery, and he was like an addict beforehand, so now he's like addicted, he got addicted to a million pills, and his wife divorced him. It's like the worst mess of the worst life, and like had to learn how to, you know, grab again. And he's functional now. He's got use of his arms and legs, but like completely fucked him up. And how, you know, there's a bond that I have with guys I serve with, and other people that have been through similar things. And even if they feel differently, you know, on some level I respect that. But I will never understand how someone can tell me that that was meant to be. Because what it was is just zeros and ones. What it was is the randomness of a trajectory of a mortar round exploding at a certain trajectory. And the fact that a tiny piece of metal went, you know, missed my spine, and that the guy standing next to me had, you know, 10 years of neurological recovery and he'll never be the same his whole life. That is not because it was supposed to be. And when other vets that have been through similar things say that, I mean, that's not something I want to fight them over, because we're all brothers in that way. When, you know, one of the things that sets me off is when civilians try to placate and talk down to you and think that they're on your side, not listening to you. Someone telling me that's meant to be just, you know, it's not quite as bad. It's almost as bad as me as like the Westboro Baptist Church. Like, thank God for IEDs, you know, because you're telling me that that was supposed to be, and it wasn't. It is you know, a sick, you know, but very real and very violent random numbers game that you don't want to be playing. And there's no reason, you know, so there are plenty of atheists in the foxholes, myself being one of them, I guess is where I'm going with that one. But, yeah. And I guess, you know, the last thing I just say is that, you know, I've been, you know, kind of in this veterans arena for a while, getting out, doing this different kind of work with these organizations, and especially with this mental health program. Me and my friend Tommy, my immediate boss, you know, such a great program, amazing people that I'm still friends with and everything. But we did have some clashes with the leadership of the program just on, you know, a number of issues, including, you know, veterans, how we talk about them, how we act. And, you know, me and Tommy there's plenty of vets like this. We just detest the bumper sticker magnet patriotism. You know, the people just like flogging themselves for how to support veterans. And these are very people, you know, they don't listen to them. Tommy, my boss, has had this great saying. He'd always say, you know, when he gets asked dumb questions, like, did you kill someone? You know, he's like, oh, I'm going to answer you. He's like, I'm going to tell you the answer, but you're not going to want to hear what I'm going to say. But I'm going to tell it to you because you asked. And just making people uncomfortable, forcing them to think about that if you care about veterans, by definition, isn't really listening to what they have to say, even if it goes against everything you've been taught to believe, or that even other veterans have said, isn't that more important than buying them a beer or sending them a care package or something like that? Isn't that more important for their mental health? I think it is, and I wish more people do that, and that's why, you know, I'm so happy that y'all are doing what you're doing, because it's important. So, yeah. Sure.